Hello, we are continuing on with our Unit 2 review. We're talking about the interactions amongst the branches of government, right? And today we are introducing Article 2, the executive branch and the president. So, in previous videos, we introduced Article 1, the legislative branch of Congress, powers, the structure, functions of Congress, right? Today we're talking about the roles and powers of the president. So we're introducing really Article 2 of the Constitution, that other foundational document, that required document, the Constitution, right? Make sure you're familiar with that, and make sure you know about Article 2, the creation of an executive branch, which was non-existent during the times of the Articles of Confederation. So the Constitution creates this position, this branch, to essentially carry out the laws, right? The executive branch, the legislative branch makes the laws, and the executive branch carries out the laws, right? So they're responsible for seeing that the laws in the United States are carried out and enforced. The learning objective of today is that students will be able to explain how the president can implement a policy agenda, right? So an agenda is a list, right? It's a list of things the president and the party of the president want to accomplish. So this is basically the list, how this list of issues, these ideas that the president or the party wants to see implemented is going to be put into policy, is going to be put into laws. We're going to talk about executive agreements, executive orders, the president's role in the lawmaking process, the president's role in foreign policy also. We're going to be looking at that, that the president can enter into treaties. He can, as the commander-in-chief, he is responsible for overseeing the military, right? And the military makes all military decisions with foreign countries, except for declaring war, right? Only Congress can declare war in the United States. So presidents use powers and perform functions of the office to accomplish a policy agenda, right? We often think of the executive branch as the enforcer of the laws. They carry out the laws and make sure that the laws are implemented. But the president also has responsibility to his party, his or her party, and to the people of the United States, to seeing that the party or the president's agenda, which often go hand in hand. The president is part of the party, right? He's usually the party leader. Those go hand in hand. But seeing that that agenda is being implemented in the United States. So there's formal and informal powers, right? The formal powers of the president are the powers granted to the president in the Constitution, right? He is the executive leader. It says that all executive powers will be vested in the president. So he is the head of the executive branch, executive leader of the United States, right? Amongst other powers given to the president are the commander-in-chief, right? He is the head of the military in Article 2. He is responsible for entering into treaties with foreign leaders and foreign countries, right? But of course, we know that those treaties must be confirmed by a 2/3 vote in the Senate. The president can also veto legislation that he sees unfit with his or her interpretation of the Constitution, right? And oftentimes, the president can veto legislation that doesn't fit his or her policy agenda, right? The agenda of the president or the party's agenda either. The president can also issue pardons, right? He can pardon people from their wrongdoing, right? When Ford pardons Nixon as a part of Watergate, he basically alleviates Nixon, relieves him of any future criminal wrongdoing or criminal procedures that he might have to face. And then we know that the president's responsible for appointing members to government, right? The president appoints all heads of the bureaucracy, right? The heads of the departments in the president's cabinet. The judges are all appointed by the president, right? The heads of the regulatory agencies and commissions, the EPA, the FBI, the CIA, all those are appointed by the president, right? So the essential knowledge says that there's formal and informal powers of the president. And these powers basically help the president implement his or her policy agenda, right? So the formal powers given to the president in the Constitution. Informal powers are powers that have been developed by that position, the president, over time. So we're going to look at some of those. The first one are vetoes and pocket vetoes, right? This basically allows the president to, one, he can sign legislation that he agrees with, right, that he sees fit and necessary for the United States. But it also allows him to veto, to cancel legislation that he sees unfit. And, I think of a Republican president and a Democratic Congress, right? Oftentimes bills passed by a Democratic, if both parties are controlled by the Democratic Party in Congress, right? Oftentimes the president might be more likely to veto those laws, right? Unless there's obviously some compromise and they can come to agreement on some things. So president can veto laws, right? We know that vetoes can be overridden by 2/3 of a vote in both chambers in Congress. So if the president vetoes a law, it will go back to Congress, and Congress can override that veto with a 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate. Pocket veto is a little bit different, right? This is where the president basically does nothing for 10 days. If the president does nothing for 10 days, it all depends on what Congress does, right? If Congress is in session and the president vetoes the bill, right, the bill would become a law, right? So oftentimes it's ways to keep Congress in session because if the president vetoes it and Congress adjourns, right, we know that bill is vetoed and cannot be overridden by Congress. So oftentimes the president can keep Congress in session by pocketing a veto and taking no action on it and after 10 days, if Congress is in session, the bill becomes a law. If Congress adjourns during those 10 days, then the bill dies and cannot be overridden. Foreign policy, right? The president's role in foreign policy. There's some formal and informal powers we're going to talk about. The two formal powers, right, powers given to the president by the Constitution when it comes to foreign policy are treaties and the president's role as commander-in-chief, the head of the military, right? So president can enter into treaties, agreements between the United States and foreign countries, right? And that's the president's responsibility for foreign policy. Right? That's the president's job to carry out or implement his or her foreign policy with foreign countries. We do know that those treaties, however, have to be confirmed by 2/3 vote in the Senate, right? As the president, as commander-in-chief, the president is the head of the military. So he makes all military decisions, right, which often has an impact on foreign countries. So, deploying troops, that's a power given to the president. All military decisions are given to the president except for declaring war. He can't declare war on foreign countries. And then the informal power in foreign policy the president has is executive agreements, right? Executive agreements are like treaties. It basically has the effect of a treaty, but it doesn't need to be approved by Senate or Congress, right? Treaties have to be confirmed by Senate. Executive agreements do not require Senate approval. So these are agreements between the president and foreign countries that don't need to be approved by the Senate. However, we know that these are only binding on that presidential term. So it is not binding on future administrations or future presidents. It's only good for that presidential term. The bargaining and persuasion power, right? These are informal powers. The power of the president as the party leader, right, to implement and carry out the party's agenda. How does he do that? Well, a lot of that comes from his power to bargain and persuade Congress. So really the only role the president has in the policymaking process is signing bills into law, right, or vetoing bills. We know that he can cancel bills and veto them. But the informal power is the president has the power to bargain and persuade Congress, right? How does he do that? the bully pulpit, right? He can often use the media to put pressure on Congress to get what he wants. It's basically the president's ability to persuade, to compromise, to work with Congress, to carry out, to pass laws that would benefit, would be favorable for that president or that party. Right, that's all. It all comes down to the president's power to bargain and persuade. Again, it's an informal power. There's nothing in the Constitution about it, but it's really the way the president can carry out his or her policy agenda through bargaining and persuading Congress. It says informal power that enables the president to secure congressional action, right, to get laws passed. So we talked about executive agreements, right? Another informal power developed over time, are these executive orders, right? Executive agreements are agreements with foreign countries. Executive orders are like laws, right? They have the effect of law, but they do not need to be approved by Senate or Congress. So they're decisions made by the president that have the effect of law, but aren't required to be approved by the Senate or the House of Representatives or Congress, right? Now, of course, these actions, all presidential actions, are subject to judicial review, right? We know that the Supreme Court has the power to overturn actions of the president if they see those actions unconstitutional. So there are still some limits on those, but they're implied from the president's vested executive power, right? That all executive powers are vested in a president of the United States. So as the executive leader, he has the power to make those executive orders, those executive decisions, right? Executive orders allow the president to manage the federal government, allow him to make decisions pertaining to the people and the government of the United States without having to secure approval from Congress, right? And the last one are signing statements, another informal power, which basically is when the president signs a bill into law, it is his approval that he gives to the law and how that law will be implemented, how that law will be carried out. So again, it's another informal power that informs Congress and the public of the president's interpretation of law, how he interprets it, and how he intends to carry it out. So those are signing statements. Again, informal, nothing in the Constitution about that, just kind of lets the people in Congress know his interpretation of that law and how that law will be implemented. Oftentimes it will assign specific agencies, right, bureaucratic agencies to carry out those laws. So that's a wrap for the roles and powers of the president. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it, you learned something, and we'll be continuing on with topic 2.5 next. Thanks.